But we begin with what is known in American politics as a soft target.
Think about what happens if we don't pass this bill. Think about what happens to your friends, your neighbors, your constituents. So I ask all of you, both sides of the aisle, what's in the best interest of our country? Not what's in the best interest of our party, not what's in the best interest of our own re-election. What's in the best interest of our country? Vote yes.
That was the top Republican in the House, John Boehner, getting emotional, getting choked up while speaking on the House floor. Keep that in mind as you watch this. The newly unveiled first campaign ad of the season from the National Republican Congressional Committee. It's an ad that targets a Democratic congressman named Joe Donnelly from Indiana. This appears to be their template ad, so you should watch what they're attacking the Democrat here for.
Joe Donnelly claims he's independent, but he's voted with Nancy Pelosi 88% of the time for the Obama-Pelosi health care plan, the Wall Street bailout.
The Wall Street bailout. Okay, here's the problem right now if you're the Republican Party. Here's the problem if you are the Republican Party trying to figure out the message that you are going to try to win on in November. If you want to run against the Wall Street bailout, first of all, you have to run against the fact that almost all of the Wall Street bailout money has been paid back. Second of all, we awkwardly still do have a financial system in America, which at one point was not a foregone conclusion, which is why we got the bailout in the first place. But most acutely, in political terms, if you want the Republican Party to run against the Wall Street bailout in this year's elections, how do you handle the fact that the Wall Street bailout was substantially a Republican policy? It was put into place under Republican President George W. Bush and his Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson. It was given the seal of approval from Republican presidential candidate John McCain. You will recall that he suspended his presidential campaign and rushed back to Washington to make sure the bailout passed. Mr. McCain's running mate, Sarah Palin, right there with him on the bailout.
Provisions and the measures that have already been taken. It is a time of crisis, and government did have to step in, playing an appropriate role. Government did have to step in there.
The National Republican Campaign Committee, which is now running ads against the bailout, is headed by a man named Republican Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas. Pete Sessions of Texas cast a vote for the bailout back in 2008. As Republicans try to cast themselves as the party ready to take over Washington, to take the country back from the horrible, horrible Democrats and their horrible, horrible Democratic policies, like that horrible, horrible Democratic bailout, here's the Republican Party's Speaker in waiting, as they keep calling him now, John Boehner, a man who not only voted for the bailout, but grew teary-eyed on the floor of the House while beseeching his fellow Republicans that they should vote for it too.
So I ask all of you, both sides of the aisle, what's in the best interest of our country? Not what's in the best interest of our party, not what's in the best interest of our own re-election. What's in the best interest of our country? Vote yes.
Vote yes. That's John Boehner imploring Republicans to vote for the bailout, as Republicans now try to campaign on how much they were against the bailout. This is not ancient history. This is not one of those unknown knowns. You can look this stuff up. It's in Google News still. There's tape. John Boehner crying over how much he wants the bailout is one giant awkwardness for Republicans as they try to put together their message for this fall, and they want it to be an anti-bailout message. It also explains why Democrats at the start of this campaign season seem to have found a very, very, very clear point of focus for their Democratic political message.
Mr. Boehner and the Republicans in Congress, Mr. Boehner and his allies. When Mr. Boehner was here in Cleveland, let me be clear to Mr. Boehner and everybody else. Mr. Boehner dismissed these jobs we saved. Mr. Boehner has so far said no to infrastructure. When these same Republicans, including Mr. Boehner, were in charge, there were no new policies from Mr. Boehner.
President Obama today in Cleveland, Ohio, delivering what was billed as a major speech on the economy and using that platform to call out John Boehner by name over and over and over again, almost as if the two men were facing off against each other on the ballot in this year's elections. A few hours before President Obama's speech today, the chairman of the Democratic Party, Tim Kaine, expanded on the John Boehner, John Boehner, John Boehner theme.
Mr. Boehner led Republican opposition to legislation important in Pennsylvania and Virginia and elsewhere that helps states in a tough time keep teachers, firefighters, and policemen on the job. This is the same John Boehner who infamously handed out tobacco company campaign checks to Republican members of Congress on the floor of the House of Representatives a couple of years ago and plotted with the Wall Street lobbyists to block financial reform.
Around the same time that Democratic Party Chairman Tim Kaine was blasting John Boehner, John Boehner, John Boehner in Philadelphia, Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office was churning out this fact sheet on John Boehner, John Boehner, John Boehner, and his policy proposals that they calculate would add $4.2 trillion to the deficit. Democrats know that history overall is against them for this year's elections. The president's party always loses seats in the first election of a new president's first term. Democrats also know that the strongest wind blowing against them right now is that the economy is really bad, and voters vote against the party in power when the economy is bad. So they know they have to talk about the economy. They know they have to campaign very aggressively, that the odds start out against them. So Democrats are making the case that Republicans are campaigning against policies that they supported. Democrats are making the case that Republicans say they're fiscally conservative, but they want to give millions of dollars to the richest people in the country without paying for it, just larding that onto the deficit. If you are the Democrats, you can make all of those policy points you want. But in a campaign year, what you really want is to have all of the bad things you want to say about the other party personified in one very easily caricatured opponent.
To most of you, I'll bet this just seems like common sense. But not to Mr. Boehner and his allies.
It is Barack Obama versus John Boehner in 2010. We speculated this might be it before. Now, as of today, Democrats are leaving no ambiguity. This is their frame: Barack Obama versus John Boehner. The Beltway media says this is elevating John Boehner. But Democrats aren't promoting him. They're not changing his job title. They are just trying to make sure that this year, this campaign season, John Boehner is very, 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 very famous. Joining us now to assess the strategy is Princeton University professor and MSNBC contributor Melissa Harris-Lacewell. Melissa, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Happy birthday.
Well, thank you. To the show, not to me. I know.
To the show.
We're so
course.
proud. Why does it help politically to have a single politician personify the opposition party? Obviously, the president plays that role for the Republicans, but why are Democrats picking one guy to be the Ichiban Republican numero uno?
Well, I mean, obviously, the problem of a midterm election is exactly as you framed it here, that it's clear who the bad guy is on the in party. It's the president. It's part of why the president's party typically loses seats in a midterm election. Voters will vote for a new president hoping that all kinds of things will change, only some things change. And so the way that they can demonstrate their discontent, presumably, is by voting against the party of the president. And therefore, they have this bad guy. They've got Barack Obama. But what do Democrats have? Well, they just have this amorphous GOP or this Tea Party or these other guys and gals. And so they're hoping to be able to embody and personify. But there is a danger here. And of course, the danger is if you run against Boehner and Boehner wins, I don't mean Boehner personally, but I mean the GOP has a big win in November, then of course what you've done is in a certain way weaken your president. You've suggested that your president can be beaten by a potential Speaker of the House. And so it's a risky strategy to decide to kind of embody everything that they're against in this one person.
Melissa, you have talked a lot, and I know done a lot of academic work on how economic stress leaves the electorate really vulnerable to political tactics that make us blame each other and divide us. Is there a high road to take in a bad economy election, or do you see both parties likely just seeking to out-scapegoat or out-blame the other guys?
You know, it is tough because, you know, history tells us that we do a sort of ethnic balkanization, a sort of pulling to our own kind and claiming that whoever is not like us must somehow be to blame for our economic downturn. If there is a high road at all, you know, interestingly, we saw a little bit of Boehner trying to do it during the passage of the Wall Street bailout, and we saw Barack Obama doing it today. When President Obama talked about his economic plan, it was framed very similar to both how his 2008 speech is, but even his 2004 speech. There's no red America, there's no blue America, there's only the United States of America. Well, similarly today, he said, really all Americans are in this boat together. I mean, again, strangely enough, this was similarly how Boehner was suggesting Republicans should be thinking about the Wall Street bailout in 2008, that this was in fact a moment when people had to think of themselves as Americans and think about the longer term strategy. So I think that there is only a high road to the extent that we're willing to think about our commonalities. Just one quick challenge there, though. If it's all about being Americans, then it still leaves us able to vilify migrant workers and undocumented workers. And so we've seen an awful lot of that sort of nasty nativism showing up.
Not to mention the Kenyan president. Right?
Not to mention.
Exactly. One last question on the specifics here. The president himself is planning to be very visible from all accounts. Multiple campaign events, the first planned press conference in a long while. Is he still the Democrats' best campaign asset, or do Democrats need somebody else out there who can throw sharper barbs than a sitting president is really allowed to?
Yeah, look, I love to see President Obama out there. He loves giving the speeches. He's a great campaigner. We know that. But I have to say, one of the reasons I was a big supporter of Joe Biden for the vice presidential position is because I always thought that Biden could provide a real asset in a moment like this. Look, don't get me wrong, but Joe Biden has a sort of a reputation for being crazy Joe. And one of the best things about your crazy uncle at a family reunion is that he says the one completely honest thing that everybody's thinking, that none of the people with an actual filter will in fact say. So I'm a big fan of kind of deploying the crazy Uncle Joe strategy. Send Vice President Biden out there. Let him kind of get tough. Let him say things that are somewhat outrageous. And then, you know, let President Obama do his typical strategy of reaching across the aisle, and he'll look and say, "Oh, come on, Joe, that may have gone too far." But I'm a big fan of let's get crazy Joe out there.
The crazy Uncle Joe strategy, TM, Melissa Harris Lacewell.
Why not?
Very good. I want the T-shirt. I want the T-shirt franchise on that. Princeton University professor, MSNBC contributor Melissa Harris Lacewell. It is always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks.